Today we'll take an early look at elements, which I think is a total game changer for the Angular ecosystem. In this episode, you'll learn how to build a regular Angular component and then export it to be used outside of an Angular app. And just for fun, we'll throw Firebase in the mix so we have a real-time persistent backend in our component as well. Then I'll give you a script tag so you can embed this component in any web application, whether that be WordPress, Ruby on Rails, a React app, Vue, whatever you want. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment because I'll be giving away some free swag at the end of the week. Before we get started here, I would recommend watching Rob's talk at ngconf to get a better idea of how Angular elements work. But the basic idea is that we can build an Angular component and then use it outside of an actual Angular app. What we're going to build today is this user poll component, which I have deployed to angularfirebase.com, which is just a static HTML site. And I've even uploaded the code to a Firebase storage bucket, so you can use this component in your own web app by simply adding these 2 lines of code anywhere in your HTML. And one last thing to mention is that as of this video at the end of April 2018, Angular 6 hasn't officially been released yet, so you can expect things to change in the near future. Let's go ahead and get started by generating a new Angular app with the CLI, and then we'll install Angular elements, and we'll want to make sure that we have Angular version 6 in package.json. Then for browser compatibility, we also need to install some polyfills, and we can get those from the web components mono repo. Then go into polyfills TS and import the custom elements polyfills. And just FYI, you can copy and paste all this code from the main lesson link in the video description. The other thing we need to do is install Firebase and Angular Fire 2, and then we'll go ahead and generate our component, which I'm calling user poll. Before we actually build the component, I want to show you how to convert it to a custom element using Angular elements. To do that, we'll go into our app module, and first we'll bring in our dependencies, which in this case is Angular Fire 2. And you should notice the user poll component is already in the declarations from the CLI. From there, we'll go ahead and import injector from Angular core, and also create custom element from Angular elements. Then because this component is not declared in the HTML and it's not used by the router, we need to add it to the entry components array. Then we'll go down to the app module class and first add the injector to the constructor. Then we'll implement the ngDoBootstrap method. Normally Angular bootstraps automatically so we don't have to worry about it, but in this case we need to bootstrap manually. The next thing we'll do is pass our Angular component to the createCustomElement method. This method serves as a bridge that will convert the Angular component to a custom element that works with native DOM APIs. And the final step is to register it by calling customElementsDefine and then give it a name and pass in the element that we just created. At this point, we should now be able to use this component outside of the main app root where our Angular components normally live. In fact, you may have noticed I removed the app component, so we can just get rid of everything in index.html and just add our custom element there as the single component for this app. Run ngserve and you should see the default component displayed in your browser. So that's a working custom element, but we still want to have this component do something cool, and we also want to be able to export it and use it in production outside of Angular altogether. Basically, we just want the user to send a yes/no response, and then we'll record that in the Firestore database and display the results. So here we are in the user poll component, and one important thing we're doing is using view encapsulation native. This will encapsulate all of our CSS styles in the shadow DOM, which is important for Angular elements because that means all of our CSS will get compiled down to JavaScript. Otherwise, it would get compiled down to plain CSS, which means we would have to import both the CSS and the JavaScript together to use this outside of Angular. From here, we'll set up a couple properties on the component just to manage the state. We'll have some yes votes, some no votes, and then we'll have a has voted Boolean flag. And we will also have a reference to the Angular Firestore document in the database. Then I'll go ahead and import Angular Firestore in the constructor. As of this video, you might see an error with Firestore timestamps. If you see this error, you can fix it by adjusting your Firestore settings to have timestamps in snapshots set to true. The next thing I'll do is in ng-on-init is reference a document in the Firestore database specifically for keeping track of the yes/no votes from this component. We also want to subscribe to the data in that component, which we can do with value changes, and it will contain the total number of yes and no votes that have been recorded. Because this isn't observable, we can pipe in the tap operator, and then we'll set our yes and no properties based on that document data. So that handles the data retrieval. The next thing we'll want to do is set up an event handler for when the user clicks the button to update the vote count. We will also set this has voted boolean to true, and when that happens, we'll go ahead and show the results and take away the buttons from the element. And then the last thing I'll do is set up some percentages here just so we can show the total ratio of vote counts and also use that to show a progress bar indicator. Now we can switch over to the component HTML. We'll finish building this out just like we would with any other Angular component. We'll use ngIf to show some buttons if the user has not voted. Otherwise, if the user has voted, then we'll show the progress bar with the total vote counts that we have stored in Firestore. I think the key takeaway here is that we're building an Angular component just like we would normally. We're not really doing anything special for Angular elements except for maybe that Vue CSS encapsulation. And even that part's optional. At this point, we have a working component, but you might be asking yourself, how do we actually get this out of Angular so we can use it somewhere else? Our production build looks something like this. We have about 5 or 6 files in here, so how do we combine all these to use them as a single script tag? Now, I should point out the Angular CLI is probably going to do this with a single command in the future, but I don't really feel like waiting for the future, so I'm just going to show you how to do it now. First, let's install a couple of npm packages to make life a little easier, file system extra, and concat. Then create a file called buildscript.js in the root of your project. Basically, all this file is going to do is grab the 3 JavaScript files that Angular builds for production and then concatenate them into a single file. That will include our inline, polyfills, and main bundle files. And make sure that you use them in that order. From there, we'll create a directory called elements in our project. Then we'll save the final output in that directory as a file called userpoll.js. Now we just need to put this together in an npm script so we can run it from the command line. I will call this command build:elements. First, it will need to run our regular Angular production build, but we'll also set the output hashing to false. Then after the build is done, we'll go ahead and run our build script that we just wrote with Node.js. If we run it from the command line, you'll see it creates this elements directory, and if we go in there, there's a single JavaScript file that we can use in any external web app. For example, I set up this demo directory, and if we go into the HTML file, we just put the user poll element in the HTML body and then the script tag right after it. It's still very early to use elements, but this opens up a whole new world of opportunity for Angular developers. I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up there. If this video helped you, please like and subscribe. And if you're serious about building apps on the Angular Firebase stack, consider becoming a pro member at angularfirebase.com. You'll get access to all kinds of exclusive resources designed to help you build and ship your products sooner. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.